My guest today is Shawn Gold, founder and CEO of Pilgrim Soul.
I've loved humor and I love connecting with people. So I've had this sort of unorthodox, sort of jocular kind of personality. And then I've also been pretty successful, and mostly people have hired me to do things that haven't existed before, to think through them using empathy and combining previously existing ideas in new ways and figuring out new models. So, having a good attitude and being happy and successful and a nice person who smokes weed, people tend to hate you. It doesn't fit into what it doesn't fit into what people believe that they were told. It doesn't, like, you can't smoke weed and be successful. That doesn't make sense. People stoners are lazy. So, like, people, not everybody, but there are people who like kind of try to find a kink in the in the armor. And that's another thing where one of my two great life philosophies are, where there's an open mind, there's always a frontier. I'm always open to new ideas and in search of perspective. I believe that everything I've learned to this moment is only precedence, a jumping off point to future ideas. And should I gain more information, my opinions could very likely change. And then the corollary to that is that only the insane take themselves seriously. If you start taking yourself seriously, that's when trouble happens. So, I use those things to kind of bob and weave through life and experience new things and really stay young. It really helps you kind of stay relevant and young. I think my biggest fear is like
cannabis.
And cannabis is like a hack on that whole thing for me. The way my mind and body, mind chemistry works, cannabis is an amazing hack. If I start taking myself too seriously, I'll smoke some, weed, and it's like truth serum for me. It just allows me to back up and look at things more objectively. So that's kind of like, stoner. When I was growing up, if you smoke weed a lot, you were a stoner. And that certainly has negative connotations. But pushing through that and becoming a successful human being and taking, the gift in some sense that cannabis has given me and turning that into success by differentiating myself in my professional roles, seeing things differently, coming up with new ideas. That's been, it's a very, very, a good relationship between, with cannabis and I. Thank you, cannabis, wherever you are. Being drunk at work is very different than, being high at work. For some people, it could be similar. So, so it's,
Yeah.
it's definitely not a perfect analogy. Not even close. So it really depends. My policy was just about production value. If you can produce, if you can deliver on your role, then it was allowed. There's smoking on the premises and things like that. There's other laws and issues that you have to deal with, but for the most part, it was really about quality of work that's delivered. For me, I can't really smoke during the day. I mean, I'm not great at. I can't do Excel spreadsheets. I'm not great at multitasking. There's a lot of things that are inhibited when I smoke cannabis. So my process is to consume information while I'm, not high. To, in my earlier career, when I was like doing ad campaigns for big brands, they have so much information to read. All these, like, the history of the brand and what they stand for and their role in society and who their target audience is and the personas of their target audience. And, you have to pull in all this information, and then and then I'd come up with strategies, and then I'd use cannabis for combinatory play, to factually meditate. I'd get high and just empathize with the target audience, like, Hot Wheels ad, like, Hot Wheels is about the nag factor. So which is basically a kid asking for the product. So you have to empathize with the kid and why they're going to want this and what they're going to say to their mom, and how you get that through in a commercial. And, like, I would have to, so, cannabis would really help me with that whole process of empathizing with what's going on, and, making these connections and things like that. So I used it for creative ideation and to go deep inside of problems and focus on problems. But I would have to set a specific time where I'm going to get high and I'm going to think about this, and, I'm not letting any other things come into my mind at that time. Like, my door's closed, my phone's off. And then, of course, there's those moments where, I really enjoy smoking pot, weed, pot, cannabis, and hanging out with friends, and the serendipity of that, and exploring ideas and just building on nonsense. And, and then ideas wash in. You can't help but have great ideas kind of wash in when you're not expecting them. That's, the equivalent of the shower idea, so my shower ideas are a lot more prolific when I'm high. So it's really about you. And I get a lot of great showering ideas in business meetings, I heard someone once say. So it's really about understanding how your brain works and optimizing that as far as using cannabis productively.
You said how you used cannabis to fuel the creative thinking, which allows you to differentiate yourself in your professional life. And I just wonder if there's any more to add there about how cannabis gave you sort of an edge in the way you use it as a tool for professional success.
Yeah, I went into it a little bit with hyper focus, where it allows me to really go deep inside a problem. Just tap into the awareness of a problem. Kind of, you get that effect when you go to, when someone smokes cannabis and goes to a museum or a concert. The music is amplified. You're like focused on, you kind of go into it deeper, or the colors on a painting pop. You empathize with the artist and what they were thinking, and it's a much deeper experience with the art. So taking that to kind of a business environment, I used it, to really kind of hyper focus on what's really happening and be present. For a lot of people, it's odd, some people are like, I'm stoned out of my mind. And then there's being high, where you're like hyper present. Like, some people will take microdosing of psilocybin or mushrooms to get hyper present. But if you take a ton of mushrooms, you're definitely not going to be present. I mean, you might be present with like the universe, but you're not going to be present with your meeting. So dosage is super important. And then empathy, as I also said, empathizing with my coworkers, empathizing with my target audience I'm trying to reach, enhanced imagination, like making, a chef imagining what flavors would taste like, or a composer imagining how different instruments would sound together. Cannabis is really great for that. For me, it was sort of just free association, factual meditation around ideas. And then lastly, I'd say the nonlinear connections. So putting previously existing ideas together in new ways. And that's, one of the biggest things about creativity when it comes to people who are not necessarily artists or designers or writers, but creative people who are scientists and educators and computer programmers, um, or even lawyers or doctors.
What do we mean by creative thinking, and what is creativity?
Yeah, that's a great question because there's so many studies on creativity and there's so many studies on cannabis and creativity, and I read them and I see flaws in them, all the time. They're just because, again, what is creativity? The classic definition is creating something new and useful. But I don't necessarily see it that way, and I don't see it that way relative to cannabis. Like, I see creativity more as a way of traveling and not necessarily a destination. It's a way of looking at the world in a different way. Like in a camera, you opening up the aperture, but instead of letting more light in, you're letting in empathy, you're letting in awareness, you're letting in presence and imagination, and the ability to make nonlinear connections. So, and it's not like people look a lot of the studies look at the cannabis user and their experience, in a very simple time period. But it's cannabis is it's a lubricant or a hack to access creative thinking in your mind. It's a creative maximizer. Again, it helps in how it helps you focus an idea, or empathize, or make connections. So, and it's really when a lifetime of experience or specific research you're doing, or combine, that cannabis sparks. It's not, hey, sit down and study this and smoke weed, and who had the best ideas, and 15 minutes later, the people who smoked the weed, the people who, who didn't smoke weed. It doesn't really work like that. It's different for every person, different for different brain chemistry, different from life experiences, different from the project you're working on. So it's very difficult to analyze cannabis and creativity and say whether it does something or doesn't do something for an individual person. Creativity is sort of bred out of us. We are all born creative. We come out of, there's a famous George Land study that I've cited before, but this guy was hired by NASA to identify their most creative scientists in the 1960s to put them on innovation projects. And he built this study based on divergent thinking, which is sort of like, imagination, no holds barred thinking. And he gave the same study to 1,600 kindergartners, and 95% of them tested expert level creative. But he tested them 5 years later when they were in the sixth grade, and I think only like 20% of them tested expert level creative. And then by the time they were 15, it was like 5% of them. So they didn't travel out, they didn't leave, they didn't transfer outside the school. These kids, were kind of taught not to be creative. We're in schools, we're taught that mistakes are bad. In some sense, we make a straight cut ditch out of this beautiful meandering brook. And as we get older, our parents, teachers, school counselors, even our peers start talking about the practical side of life. We've this school system that we have was built, really formalized in the 1890s to support the industrial age, and it's very much about siloed thinking. We're given these standardized tests that only have one right answer. In school and college, we're given multiple choice tests designed to have one right answer. We're given true false tests where you have to pick one or the other, with really no room for exceptions or creative thinking. Very often, mistakes are the creative part of what we do. And our school system doesn't really allow for that, and to elaborate on that and to lean into it. And then as we get older, default thinking is something that we get stuck on. As adults, we lean on the past. We make a decision, we learn something, and we go back to that, reference that, like, in some sense, get lazy, and we don't want to challenge something we already know. So, like I said before, in the beginning, one of my philosophies is where there's an open mind, there's always a frontier. My default thinking is to challenge default thinking. And that's one way to really stay creative, is to think that way. So when you're a kid, you don't have a past. It doesn't matter that horses aren't purple in real life. You make your horse purple. So those are some, a couple key things. And then there's judgment, like, when are you going to get a real job? You can have someone spending 60 hours a week making music. They may not be making money, or even if they are making money, people might still say, when are you going to get a real job? And it's just, that's old thinking. We live in this world where creativity is a competitive advantage, where, if you're a lawyer, I've said this before, but if you're a lawyer in the year 2040, say, and you're not a creative one, your job will probably be done in Asia, or it'll be done by a computer. So it's, creativity is more and more and more an essential skill that you need to teach your children today, so they are employable, in the year 2040.
While I was listening to you and I was reflecting on you using creativity as a muscle and something you work on it every day, and what are the end results of that, or not end results, but how does that show up for you when you have strong creative muscles? I'm thinking of problem solving, resourcefulness. That's really what it's all about.
Yeah, I mean, there's a bunch of really great creative techniques, and my we'll talk about it later, but this journal that I created, meant to be used while you're high, but you can certainly use it while you're not high. It's just full of all these different techniques that help you challenge default thinking, get past, judgment, go with your gut and your instinct, and, really tap into your innate creativity. My brand, Pilgrim Soul, which I created, is not about teaching people to be creative as much as it is helping them tap into their innate creativity and unlock the creativity that's inside them. I believe, someone emailed me after they bought my journal, and like, I've tried it and I'm just not creative. And I wrote back, that's impossible. Like, everyone's creative. You're not, you may not paint like Picasso or write like Faulkner, but it's about elevating who you are and tapping into your creativity, and again, opening that aperture. So, and being creative certainly doesn't mean, or using cannabis for creativity certainly doesn't mean that all your ideas are going to be great ideas. Most of them will be terrible, as a matter of fact. But it's about idea production more so. It's better to have a couple, 10 silly ideas and one great one than it is to have no ideas or some highly inhibited ideas. So
it was Carl Sagan who said, write your ideas down and then check them later when you're not high to assess their worth.
Oh, totally. Carl Sagan is one of my favorite, stoners.
Yeah. Well, we should definitely dive into Carl Sagan a little later, but that journal looks really awesome, by the way. Do you have a copy there? Can you, I don't have my copy yet, but I would love to, please use the journal while you are high. Oh
Yes.
man, that's
the Pilgrim.
I wonder if you could talk a little more about the journal, what you've done with this, and what you guys are doing over at Pilgrim Soul.
So Pilgrim Soul is a creativity company, focused on helping people unlock. It's really focused on optimizing human creative performance for personal fulfillment, and really, for a competitive edge in work and what you do, how you spend your time thinking most of the day. And the tool set is exclusive blends of cannabis that we've put together with these cannabis scientists at a company called Abstracts Labs in California. It's creative curriculum in the forms of these journals. And there's a bunch, there's a series of them. This is the first one. Expert content on pilgrimsoul.com, which is a lot of how-to and historical content around creativity. And probably 30% of it is around cannabis and creativity, but it's mostly just about creativity in general. And then, the last leg would be community, people helping each other with their creativity, giving perspective and sharing ideas. So that's what the brand is about. And then the journals are about, getting you to engage in a series like fun, creative challenges that are designed to increase your creativity and build more productive habits. So we have probably about 50 challenges that push you to rethink how you see yourself and the world around you, and uncover new possibilities and ideas. There's a bunch of stuff that reveals sort of misconceptions about creativity and annoying aspects of the mind that help us repress our creative thinking. And then we also share like the research behind the method. The journal is broken into 4 sections that correspond with creative thinking. So there's a creative imagination section, which is about divergent thinking and just, raw ideation. There's a creative focus section, which is about combining logic and creativity, which is more probably like how we think at work. There's a creative reflection section that is about looking inside yourself to find creativity, which is kind of more very similar to a best-selling book called The Artist's Way, where it's like you write morning pages and talk about your childhood and things like that. And then there's a creative awareness section, which is about riffing on the world around you. In the creative awareness section, there's the one exercise like go to a coffee shop. It's like basically a field guide for coffee shops. So you go into a coffee shop and you find a person to focus on, and you analyze them like you're writing a field guide for animals. Like, what are their natural habitats? Like what are their eating habits? Like, their socialization process. And you take you take a different system and apply it to another system to look at something in a different way. And it's hilarious, but it's also kind of useful. And then in the creative focus section, there's an exercise called losing speech, where your kids' peewee, you're the coach of your kids' peewee basketball team. You're up 10 points at the half, but you bet heavily against them. So give a halftime speech that allows your team to lose with dignity while you trash yours. And so it's kind of funny. If you were reading this exercise in a classic innovation or creativity book, it would be like, give a motivation speech about, to a basketball team, which anybody can write that. Giving a speech on like how to lose, that's creative. So, in the why section of that, it's about empathy and manipulation through storytelling, and empathizing with the parents and empathizing with the kids and understanding the cultural implications, and, all those things coming together to tell a story with these different variables is, part of the creative process and part of creative focus, where you're working towards a goal using storytelling to manipulate people. So those are some, and there's drawing exercises, and there's, some simple connection exercises, like these symbols that make, and then there's these words that don't exist, like that I've completely made up, and these symbols next to them, and you have to match the symbol with the word, and there's no right answer. But when you're looking at them, they seem to some people they seem obvious, like this nonsensical word is this symbol. And then there's another one that's fun to do with people, which is called word links, which I like to do with friends, where you have two seemingly unrelated words, and you have to make a bridge from one to the other using 4 to 5 words. So it might be like tambourine and squirrel. And, how do you connect those 2 universes? Or hooker and hot sauce, or remote control and divorce. What's the bridge?
Oh, I love that. I just love the storytelling element, man. I got to write that down, right? Remote control and divorce.
What are the 5 words? And what's fascinating is when you're doing this with a friend, and they write theirs down, you write yours down, and then you share, and you're like, that's how you got from remote control to divorce? Like, that's the way your mind thinks? It's really interesting to see how people think, process information. You know, it's fascinating and really and usually pretty hilarious.